So if you had to describe the first 6 months of Governor Ferguson, how would you each describe it, like in one word or one sentence?
Elusive, maybe?
That's a good one. I was going to say confusing. Or just
Struggling is a word that comes to mind for me, for him, for the governor, personally. So, and I think it'll be memorable when this term is over.
When you get 3 Washington state politics reporters in a room these days, this is the vibe. It's been a weird time to cover the state house, and especially the governor. How has it felt being a state politics reporter in the last 6 to 9 months here?
If you're in Olympia, it's pretty frustrating.
I was going to say frustrating.
It's frustrating because we're not the most important folks, but we're in the building. So you just see folks and you don't get access to folks. Right? You see the agency leaders, you see the staff, you see the governor, and you can't get the access that we've had before. Jerry Cornfield, currently working at the Washington State Standard in Olympia, online news source, and been covering the state politics here since I arrived in the state in 2004.
I'm Melissa Santos. I'm a reporter at Axios Seattle. I was just trying to think. I think the first session I covered at the legislature was 2007, but then I kind of did some other stuff for a while, and I've been focused on state government largely since 2013 or so 12 or so years now.
And I am Laurel Demkovich. I work for Cascade PBS. I've been covering state politics in Washington since 2020, summer of 2020, a super normal and chill time to start covering a brand new state. So.
Yeah, nothing happened that year. So I sat down with Jerry, Melissa, and Laurel to get their take on the new governor. Not only because it's their job to know as much as possible about who he is and what he's doing, but because his closed-off approach to the press has been one of the clearest through lines of his administration. If there's been surprise and confusion around Governor Ferguson, if there's been this sense of misalignment between expectations and reality, all of that is compounded by his unusual lack of communication with the reporters who cover him. Yeah, what have your interactions been like with the governor's office this year?
I mean, I feel like I'm bugging them a lot, but not always getting a lot of responses, or, if there is a response, it's not anything particularly useful.
Past governors have had more people responding. Even the last governor, you would send email requests to 2 people.
And at least one of them would always respond and at least say, we're checking on this, or here's some background information.
I wasn't expecting sort of the lack of press availabilities. These are when the press really has an opportunity to just free-form ask questions.
This, notably, is something that past governors have routinely done, usually weekly.
He does do some press conferences that are sort of set up about a specific topic, but he's not doing as many of these sort of back and forth. Maybe I talk for 30 seconds at the top, but then just take reporter questions for a half hour. I will say that surprised me a little because he has been very in the press for many years, to the point that it was a point of criticism. Like, oh, he's running for governor. He's just doing all these grandstandy press conferences about lawsuits when he was attorney general. That was a criticism we heard from Republicans. So sort of to see him almost feel like he's retreating a bit from the press felt a little weird to me.
This is Northwest Reports. I'm Sara Bernard. So the widespread reactions to the new governor that we're seeing right now, whether from lawmakers, voters, advocates, or journalists, they have one thing in common. People simply don't seem to know or can't seem to predict what the governor is doing or why. And one thing that's contributing to that is that he's keeping his communications very tight.
We're not going to get ahead of the governor in terms of what his preferred pathways are.
Unless you're Senator Jamie Peterson, who we heard from in the last episode, and you've known Bob Ferguson for decades, chances are you're a little bewildered. It's hard to know what's on the governor's mind if he rarely says it.
We met with the governor this week. We didn't talk at all about press availabilities.
So in this final episode of our series, Ferguson versus Everyone, we wanted to dive deep on that one element, Ferguson's public communication. Unlike past governors, who've made themselves frequently available to the press through open-ended press conferences, interviews, and public announcements about their calendars, Ferguson's office has been remarkably quiet. This reduced communication has bled into other arenas too, with lobbyists remarking on the dearth of opportunities to speak with the governor's office, and voters saying they also don't understand what he's up to. That guessing game throughout the legislative session is part of what led to feelings of surprise, good or bad, toward the end. We should say, again, we've repeatedly asked Governor Ferguson to speak with us for this series, but so far, he hasn't. Okay, back to Melissa, Jerry, and Laurel. So there's one more word that Melissa wanted to add to this impromptu word list for Governor Ferguson.
Can I do one more?
Oh, please.
Precise was what I first noticed when we first started covering Ferguson. Inslee kind of spoke off the cuff a lot. You'd often sort of check, like, is this stat the right stat? Did he say what I think he said? Are we good with his staff after sometimes? But he also was very accessible. I'm not saying he wasn't. Ferguson, I believe he writes and puts everything in his speeches, confirms them, checks them very carefully before he speaks. So it's sort of very different presence is a bit when you're kind of just going and speaking with these governors, or not really speaking with Ferguson, but watching him speak to you, I should say.
You use precise. I was thinking about micromanage.
That actually is what I kind of wanted to say. I guess, yes.
I mean, in terms of the operation.
I mean, my impression is he's checking commas on press releases that go out for every agency. This is one reason it's hard to get responses nowadays.
According to these three reporters, as well as reporting in the Seattle Times, Governor Ferguson's office now officially requires most state agencies to provide them with advance notice of all media interviews and news releases. Jerry says he's noticed this level of control even in the behavior of state agency staff at in-person events like bill signings.
Conversations just were uncomfortable. Some would just not want to talk because they knew they were being watched. Some staff members just, they were never very, just kind of, social. It was difficult to have social conversations because everyone's kind of wondering who's watching, who's talking to the press. It's all going to go through the comms department, and pretty much there's one person in the comms department who's responsible for responding to all of us, whereas that hasn't been the case in the past.
And it's a little weird because the agencies have their own comms people, right? So there's all these comms people, and there's 10 reporters who cover the Capitol. You're so outnumbered by, dozens and dozens of state comms people. And now they're kind of having to go through the governor's office to give you responses. It seems very inefficient to me. And it also takes longer for us to get responses. And it builds frustration, I think, on probably all sides.
I mean, these are experienced comms people. Most of them are on their third governor. So they know exactly who's in charge, what we can say, what we can't. They know those limits. And now, like you say, they have to go through one person who has no real understanding of all their agencies yet. It's too soon.
I used to get responses back quickly when we emailed the governor's staff because I think they felt empowered to just respond to us without having to run every word of their response by the governor.
Melissa is in a unique position right now because her reporting in recent months has raised some serious hackles in the governor's office.
Axios Seattle reporter Melissa Santos broke this story, and she joins me now.
This spring, Mike Webb, Governor Ferguson's former chief strategy officer, resigned amid allegations of workplace misconduct.
What the heck's going on in Washington State Governor Bob Ferguson's office, where he's having his legislative aides essentially quit?
Melissa followed this event closely and broke some news around it. We're not going to go into all of the details of that here, but it's relevant in part because a source sent Melissa an audio recording of a recent meeting in the governor's office, and that offered some insight into how he operates. For instance, around emails.
The governor's office recently had a meeting in which they discussed my reporting at length, and it was very interesting to me because the governor at one point said that they were finalizing sort of a follow-up reply to me. He was on the phone with his comms director finalizing some reply. This is like a sixth email in a chain. And I'm just like, is the governor personally signing off on every email that is sent to me? I maybe understand the initial response to something controversial, which this story sort of was. But it just seems like, wow. So I guess we are sort of hearing from the governor in these sort of workshop emails we get back.
Yeah.
It just takes a few days, maybe. I also feel like it's not a friendly relationship right now. And I say that because In this leaked audio recording that me and a Seattle Times reporter got of this meeting that was discussing one of my stories inside the governor's office, they told a bunch of things about my reporting process that were not accurate to staff, about how I didn't give them time to respond and this and this. I mean, whatever. They can say whatever they want in internal meetings, but it felt so much more combative. And again, like some of these were outright untruths, lies about my story published before I could read it, their email response, things like that, where I'm like, wow, that just, granted, I don't have internal, meeting recordings that I can compare from the Inslee administration, but I don't feel like even when we kind of butted heads on stories, there was like sort of this lying about the press process in the place. And that kind of surprised me a little. Because I think if you ask Bob Ferguson, publicly, he'd say the role of the press is super important, all of this. And they, of course, can take issue with the story. They have every right with that. But just to be telling, dozens of staff members that this reporter did this and this when that's not true kind of surprised me.
Some of that could possibly be diffused or expanded if we could just sit down and have a conversation. But unlike prior administrations, offers from the press corps to have a meet and greet, sit around a conference room table. You got beefs with us, we got beef with you. Or maybe, how do you like to operate? How do we like to operate? By the way, here's our names and our faces because you've never dealt with us before. None of that. All the entreaties, all the requests were, turned down. They just didn't want to. Chief of staff didn't want to. Communication director didn't want to. They didn't see any value in that. But listening to Melissa, it's obviously they could. And we've had some, former Associated Press editor and leader of our press corps, Rachel LaCourte, many times would set up meetings we had during the Inslee and Gregoire administrations. And they were pretty frank, some of those conversations about our beefs with them and their beefs with us.
I mean, the previous governor sat down with me at a bar and had like a beer and like cheese curds and, whatever. It's just a little different. I have asked to talk to the governor directly about some stories because sometimes, honestly, it's more efficient. And I needed to hear from the governor about a story I just wrote, which was about how he handled a situation in his former office. And I just didn't get that access. I asked at least 3 times and I just didn't get that.
But it's not just Melissa. All 3 of these reporters have been asking for one-on-one interviews with Ferguson since his election. And in Jerry's case, since well before.
I think he entered the campaign in September 2023, so I think my request started then.
None of them have been granted one yet. Though Ferguson did do an interview with Cascade PBS host Paris Jackson on his inauguration day, after canceling an interview with Paris during election season. One byproduct, of course, of doing so few interviews and so few press conferences, especially open-ended ones, is the way it made the governor's policy intentions much harder to parse.
Any policy during the legislative session, you try to ask him about or you don't even have the chance to ask him about, like you have no idea how he was feeling about some of the really controversial, bills that were making their way through, rent caps. I guess we knew about the law enforcement grants, but there were some gun-related bills.
The gas tax.
The gas tax, yeah.
An increase in the gas tax and no conversation or debate really from the governor until he signed it.
Yeah, so you have no idea what he's thinking. So, voters or advocates or people who are tracking these things or who really care about some of these issues are not getting anything from their governor, in part because we're not getting the time to ask, or we're just getting these very manufactured responses to things that don't really actually say anything.
This kind of theme of not knowing what the governor is doing or not having access to the governor, and as perhaps happened in the past, that has extended beyond the press corps to lobbyists and advocates. And, for example, Laurel, I know you spoke with Mike Yastrzemski, who's the head of the State Employees Union. He said he expected to have hard conversations with the governor's office.
I expected hard conversations. I didn't expect to not have conversations.
Yeah, I mean, the general theme of talking to him throughout the session is just that he expected and wanted more just communication, and there just wasn't any. And I think that spread with other groups and just in the Capitol in general. The vibe was that it was really hard to get Ferguson to talk, or anyone in his office to meet with you or to talk with you. about a variety of topics that maybe former governors were more willing to discuss.
Did you know what he was going to do on the budget? I honestly had zero idea heading into when the governor was signing the budget. Is he going to veto these tax increases? He's been talking about how taxes are not really the right path in many ways. You assume they've had conversations behind the scenes with the lawmakers, then the lawmakers know their bills aren't going to get vetoed. But generally, we had just a better idea. Was the governor on board with this policy that they anchored the budget to or not? And I honestly didn't know. Did you know? And I just was missing all the signs?
I don't think I knew. But I think also part of that is that he didn't have a press conference the night that the legislature adjourned. He
didn't have a sine die press conference? Wow.
He sent out a very long statement that, I don't know, highlighted all of these things that he was happy about, but didn't. I think he still was like, I'm going to take a look over the next 21 days at these tax increases and, we'll see what happens. Like, he still didn't commit to agree or liking anything.
For context, they hold sine die press conferences at 12:15 in the morning, midnight, after, being in session for 6 months sometimes.
And it's always the governor and the Democrats have been in charge.
Yeah, the governor's always there.
They also did negotiations, especially in the Gregoire administration, where we're in the hallway, trying to get inside, waiting. We know they're all in the room talking, and we're out there waiting. But now there's no press conferences, so we don't have to wait.
Yeah, so no press conferences.
Now, hopefully we'll get one after all this conversation.
Yeah, exactly.
It'll be just a free form. I mean, back to if it can't be orchestrated and precise, I think that's the problem. A press conference on just, let me just stand here and answer your questions on anything. Mm-hmm. He's just not going to riff on anything.
That's my understanding, is that there are just fewer press conferences, and the conferences that are there are usually focused on a topic, not as open-ended as past administrations. And the other thing that I understand is happening is that it's hard to even know where he is at any particular time. I understand the Washington State Standard recently launched a sort of column in your newsletter about, I think it's called Where's the Governor? Right?
Well, now we know.
Jerry?
We're getting calendar updates.
Now because you started the column, they tell you now?
No. I mean, you should be getting some in your inbox. They started the last couple of weeks. But yeah, I mean, it wasn't intended to be snarky. It wasn't intended to be anything other than we're just accustomed to knowing that you're doing something each week on behalf of the state, most likely as a governor. And until recently, there hadn't been any kind of, and during the schedules other than the bill signings, we really, where was he? Was hard to track down.
The calendars that come the day after they happened just really frustrate me, because it could be something, in a different part of Washington that maybe someone would want to cover, at that local news organization, but they had no idea because it came 2 days after the fact.
I think when we started, maybe when I started getting a little bit concerned, was getting one of those calendars and it showed that he was in New York. But we got it after he was already in New York and back.
And this matters because, as the Washington State Standard noted when they announced their Where is Governor Bob Ferguson column, when a governor leaves the state, technically the lieutenant governor is in charge. Under past administrations, journalists were given a heads up when that happened.
We haven't been told once in advance when the governor has left the state. And he has left the state, sometimes just to go into Portland, Oregon, sometimes to go farther in his 7 months.
Of course, there's more going on here than just a bunch of journalists complaining. There's good reason to be able to know what our elected officials are up to.
Right. I guess I should say, because it might just sound like we're all just kind of whining about, we aren't getting quotes we need for our stories. But the thing is, if we can't actually ask the governor and other officials questions directly, what the public is getting are these workshopped 6 people kind of making a sort of Frankenstein statement to send out. So we don't totally know if it reflects how the governor would answer us on the spot. And that provides less insight into what he's thinking, which means voters have less insight into what he's thinking. And also, if we can't ever ask the governor a question, we don't know if he's changed his position necessarily from 6 months ago or whatever. So that makes it harder for the public to hold the officials accountable, and it makes it harder for the press to hold officials accountable on the public's behalf. So that's why it matters. It's not just about us being annoyed because our stories take longer to write or we get quotes that aren't very, very snappy. It's not just that.
I mean, to bring it full circle, if you don't get access to the governor and you can't get access to the agency folks, then when the press release comes out of whatever it may be, or a new study comes out, it takes a lot of work. And I think folks start to think their government isn't working for them.
And this, Jerry says, leads us right back to the results of the Cascade PBS Elway poll this summer, which we heard about in the last couple of episodes.
Or they wonder about the governor. And I think it showed in the Elway poll, right? This is a guy who had the least favorable rating in his first 6 months since Mike Lowry. Now, for those folks who don't know, I'll just give the last two governors. Gregoire won an election after 3 counts. It was when she was serving, the state was divided, and it was, we think you stole the election. There was a trial going on whether she should even be governor. She scored higher in his first 6 months. Governor Inslee couldn't get along with the Republicans in the Senate, nearly shut the government down. He scored higher. Neither of those conditions existed. So I think part of it is they don't know where their governor is.
Yeah, and I've talked to a couple of voters for my story on that poll, and, a lot of them said that they don't feel represented in their government, and part of the reason is because they just don't know, with Ferguson in particular, they just don't know why he's doing what he's doing, what he's even doing, and I think, part of that is because he's not giving, press access, or he's only, announcing publicly specific parts of his job.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think the poll also had a question about how represented do you feel by your state government, and that also ranked, I believe, the lowest ever, basically, in the history of the Elway poll. There's a lot of bad vibes in that poll, but that was one of them. Here's Stuart Elway again, talking about this part of the poll results.
We asked a question that we've asked over the years about how well represented you feel in state government. And starting in 1985, I think I probably have some before that, but through the 80s, 90s, and up to 2000, it was 65, 67% said, I feel pretty well represented. And then it dropped after 2000. And then this time it was 42% said they feel at least somewhat represented in state government. So there's a 20, 25-point drop in the last, say, generation. We've got a lot of lowest numbers in this poll, and this was the lowest that we've seen in answer to that question. They just don't feel like they're being represented.
I did ask Stuart, who's now been a pollster in Washington state for 50 years, whether any of these results surprised him.
The numbers of people who think things are getting worse really struck me. Why would the state outlook be lower than it's ever been right now? I mean, not that it's low, but why is it lower than ever? I don't really know that I have an answer for that.
And it's not like the public's not tuned in these days. I mean, what's going on around the world, what's going on in Washington, D.C., people are tuned in, but they're tuned out.
And I think there was an expectation because, the former attorney general, now governor, as attorney general, talked a lot about the dozens of lawsuits he filed against the Trump administration. Granted, he's in a different role now, and Attorney General Nick Brown is filing a fair amount of lawsuits, so that's still happening.
More.
Yeah, but the governor, I don't think, has been doing the sort of pulpit against Trump the way he did in his previous role, and there's probably reasons for that. I mean, but I don't think people are seeing him sort of stand up to Trump in the way they expected.
This is what Senator Jamie Peterson said in the last episode, too. And it makes a ton of sense. If you're talking about the left-leaning voters who are waiting for that progressive anti-Trump warrior from 2017 to show up again. But there are also plenty of people, including Representative Chris Corey, who you heard from in the first episode, who think the governor is doing too much talking about the Trump administration and too little talking about local issues.
Pam Bondi seems to think and seeks to have Washington State bend the knee to a Trump administration that day by day drags us closer to authoritarianism. The president's tariffs, again, if fully implemented, will cut up to 31,900 jobs from Washington State alone.
It seems like what we're seeing now is some surprising confusion, and a lot of that, we've heard it from lawmakers and lobbyists and journalists, and voters, and a lot of that might have to do with expectations. Like, who do we think Bob Ferguson is? And he made such a splash, even nationally, when he was fighting the first Trump administration. That was sort of like his brand, if you will. And he sued the administration something like 100 times or something like that, right? So maybe that idea is creating certain expectations in people's minds, whether they want more of that or less of that. And if he's not that, what is he? And maybe we just haven't seen much yet, even though
he's developing his personality as a governor, right? I mean, he has a good personality, and when you catch him on the campaign trail, you see him interact with folks. You chit chat with him. It's small talk, very small talk, but he's personable. And so there is something there, but now he's governor and he's trying to find that personality and when he can let down. He doesn't want to let him, but I'm worried he's thinking ahead to the next race. That's what other folks think.
I don't want to get too inside baseball here either, but there has been turmoil inside the governor's office, and I do wonder how that's contributed to sort of his reticence to get out in front of people.
Yeah. The allegations against the governor's chief strategy officer could seem tangential to the larger conversation here. But Melissa says the cascade of resignations around that event this spring could certainly have destabilized things.
His legislative director resigned in the middle of the legislative session. Another legislative staffer who was pretty high up also resigned. And then it turns out there were concerns from those employees potentially about his top guy. One of his top guys is Chief Strategy Officer Mike Webb. And I don't know if that's part of why he's not sort of maybe publicly having the same sort of confident footing he maybe had in his last role.
I guess looking forward, what are you all going to be watching for? Like, what do we think is going to happen at this point?
I think this is a good time for Governor Ferguson to kind of reset how he operates with everybody. And I mean, he has to really think about it and then reset it. I mean, look, he's a chess master. So he knows where all the pieces are and how to move them, how to get a checkmate. But this isn't a game where you just go for the checkmate. You've got to have some strategy. And he has to reset his relationship with the Democrat leaders. He needs to reset with the unions and with the labor groups. He has to reset with everybody that felt offended or ignored or had trouble, and with his own staff. I mean, I think internally he's got to figure out his whole operation. Because if they continue to do the same things they've been doing, it's going to be really tough.
Maybe I shouldn't say this will happen, but I hope that, now that maybe some of his internal staff upheaval is settling a little bit. He has been through a legislative session. I'm hopeful that he is settling a little bit more, and maybe, some of these, like you said, Jerry, some of the people he's pissed off, he's working, with them. Maybe he'll have some more press conferences and be a little bit more open about, what he is working on or what he approves of or disapproves of.
I'm not optimistic that much will change. I think this is the way that Ferguson has probably operated for a long time in government. It just was a different role where that maybe made more sense, or it wasn't in the spotlight so often. And I don't think that the chess master who wants to be in control of everything is going to relinquish that easily now that he has, dozens of agencies. I just think that I don't know that he's just going to say, okay, I'll back off a little. I'll just get chit-chatty with the press. I'm not seeing it.
Public service is hard. I mean, and if you're governor, you're a public servant. So, it's not an easy job, but it requires, and why it's hard is that you have to respect everybody you come in contact with, and the governor, you come in contact with a lot of folks. I think there is a sense that, and why it's concerning and why he probably didn't do well in the Elway poll is that he's not radiating enough, if you will, respect and trust of those who put him in office. And I think he's got his communication style, the way he set up his team. He's a true public servant. He's been doing this for 2.5, 3 decades. He knows how to overcome adversity. He did it on the King County Council. So he knows how to get where he wants to get to. I just think he has to find a different path, and he has to respect the people. In our case, it's us, the press, but I think a lot of other folks would, He needs to respect that everyone's got their job to do too, and maybe it'll make him a better public servant.
It's true that the governor has been in politics for more than 2 decades, and he knows a lot about how this game works. He's defied a lot of expectations so far, but he's got plenty more ahead. There is no pleasing everyone in this business, though a few more conversations with the press couldn't hurt. Anyway, not to take Senator Peterson's analogy too far, but I keep coming back to it. It feels like how you rate this movie right now depends entirely on what you thought the movie was going to be like. But Governor Ferguson isn't even a full year into his first 4-year term. So if it is a movie, we're only like half an hour in. There's still popcorn left. So grab some. We've got another legislative session coming up. Let's see if there's a plot twist. Thanks for listening to the 3rd episode of Ferguson vs. Everyone. Be sure to check out the other 2 episodes, which are available right now wherever you get your podcasts. You can also read Laurel Demkovich's written story on this topic at cascadepbs.org. This episode of Northwest Reports was reported by Laurel Demkovich and produced by me, Sara Bernard. The story editor was Ryan Famuliner. Our executive producer is Sarah Menzies. Our production manager is Adam Brown. Thanks to Resti Bakal and Eric Msumanje for their help in the studio. You can subscribe to Northwest Reports wherever you listen, and whatever platform you're listening on, please review us. We'd love to know what you think of the show. Northwest Reports is made possible by listeners like you. Your support will tell the stories that shape Washington State. Join the members who help us create Northwest Reports. Your donation will be put to work right away, delivering the Cascade PBS lineup of podcasts, video docuseries, and daily in-depth reporting that you and so many rely on. In addition to supporting our journalism, members receive great member benefits, including Cascade PBS Passport, with extended access to an on-demand library of local and PBS favorites. Go to cascadepbs.org/NW Reports to sign up today. For the latest political, investigative, and cultural coverage from the Pacific Northwest, visit cascadepbs.org. That's also where you'll find Ferguson vs. Everyone. I'm Sara Bernard. We'll be back soon with another episode.